My parents think it's selfish for me to go to college when that money could be used for my sister's wedding. She's a dropout, but I'm the one who's supposed to be selfish. I'm 18, a high school senior, and for the past 4 years, my entire world has revolved around one goal: getting into a good university. I've sacrificed parties, social events, and sleep to maintain a perfect grade point average. But in my family, academic achievement is apparently worth less than a massively overpriced party for my sister Madison and a guy she's known for less than a year. Madison is 24 and her life path has been different. She dropped out of high school at 16 and has bounced between retail jobs ever since. When she got engaged a few months ago, my parents went into a planning frenzy that made a royal wedding look like a backyard barbecue. So, yes, my years of hard work are officially less valuable than a wedding for two people who barely know each other. Now for some background. When I was born, my grandparents set up a college trust fund for me. They did the same for Madison. When she was supposed to graduate high school, her share was allegedly set aside for future projects, a vague term no one ever bothered to define. I never thought much about it until last weekend, when my parents called a family investment meeting. They sat me down, beaming, and talked about how they wanted to give Madison the wedding of her dreams. Then came the ambush. They proposed I postpone college for a few years so the family could focus on Madison's big day. They explained that with all the wedding planning, they couldn't possibly help me with the transition to college life. All this nonsense about transitioning as if I need a team of Sherpas to help me move into a dorm room was just a cover. They wanted my college fund to help pay for her wedding, which, by the way, had a projected cost of $250,000. And that's just a projection. We all know those numbers only go up. Their logic was that since I'm a good student, I'll probably get scholarships, so I don't really need the money. Meanwhile, Madison needs it for her fantasy wedding. They even framed it as a good deal for me, giving me time to work and travel while they saved up again. Here's the shocking news for my parents. I don't want to travel. I want to go to college. That's what I've worked for, not to fund a party for someone who can't commit to a job for more than 6 months. I stayed calm, but inside I was absolutely seething. I told them no. Absolutely not. The money was for my education and that was final. My future wasn't a piggy bank for my sister's whims. My refusal was met with a declaration of psychological war. My parents, Michael and Jennifer, couldn't believe their perfectly logical plan was rejected. The next day, Madison posted a long, rambling, passive-aggressive rant on social media about how some people are just born lucky and never have to struggle, and how it's sad when family won't support your happiness. It was a masterpiece of vague victimhood. My parents, meanwhile, took a more direct approach. My phone started blowing up with texts. My mom sent me links to articles with titles like, "Why Student Debt Builds Character," and 10 Benefits of Taking a Gap Year You Never Considered. My dad called to tell me that making sacrifices for family is the ultimate expression of love, and that I should be grateful for the opportunity to help my sister. I suggested that maybe Madison could strengthen family bonds by, getting a second job. That didn't go over well. I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't win this fight inside that house. It was their territory, and the air was thick with entitlement and manipulation. I needed to escalate, but I needed to do it smartly. Just as I was packing a bag, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Karen. She'd seen Madison's post and called to check on me. "Don't you let them bully you," she said, her voice firm. "That money is for your future. Your grandparents put it there for a reason, and they would be horrified if they knew what your parents are trying to do." Hearing that was like a shot of adrenaline. It was the validation I desperately needed. Someone else saw the insanity. I wasn't the selfish one. Fortified by her words, I finished packing my bag, walked out the front door and got in my car. I knew exactly where I was going. My grandparents had a small lakeside cottage about 2 hours away. It was my sanctuary. More importantly, they were the guardians of the trust. My parents wanted to have a family investment meeting? Fine. I was about to bring in the board of directors. This wasn't just a retreat, it was a strategic move. I was taking the fight to neutral ground and bringing in the people with the real power. I drove away from the suffocating atmosphere of my home, feeling a surge of resolve I hadn't felt in days. The war was just beginning, but I had just found my strongest allies. When I arrived at the cottage and told my grandparents, David and Lisa, about the $250,000 wedding plan, their reaction was everything I had hoped for. My grandmother's sweet, gentle face hardened into something I'd rarely seen. My grandfather went silent, which was always a sign that he was furious. They weren't just disappointed, they were livid. Without even consulting me, my grandfather picked up his phone. "Michael," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You, Jennifer, and Madison need to get out here. Now." My dad apparently tried to make excuses, saying they were busy, that tomorrow would be better. My grandfather cut him off. "I wasn't asking." Within 3 hours, my parents and a very sullen Madison were standing in my grandparents' living room. The confrontation was immediate and brutal. My grandfather, David, laid it out in no uncertain terms. "The trust is legally ironclad," he stated, looking directly at my father. "The funds are designated for educational purposes only. They cannot be touched for a wedding, a car, or anything else. The discussion is over." My parents started to sputter about family unity and supporting Madison's dreams, but my grandmother held up a hand. "This isn't about dreams, Jennifer. This is about a legal and moral obligation we have to Jessica's future. Then my grandfather dropped the bombshell. He turned to Madison. You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about your own trust fund. Madison looked confused and my parents went pale. The one we set up for you? The one that was identical to Jessica's? We looked into it. It's empty. The room went dead silent. Your parents, he continued, his eyes locking onto my father's, came to us years ago. They said you wanted to start a business, then another one. They said you needed help with living expenses. They liquidated your entire trust, piece by piece, to fund a lifestyle you weren't earning. My jaw dropped. I had no idea. My grandfather then looked at all of them, his voice filled with a lifetime of disappointment. This is the anatomy of enabling. Every time you gave her money she didn't earn, you weren't helping her. You were teaching her that consequences don't apply to her. You taught her that her wants are more important than anyone else's needs, including her sister's. You created this problem, Michael. And now you have the audacity to try and steal from your other daughter to continue funding it. It ends today. The humiliation of that meeting didn't deter them. It just made them more desperate. The truth about Madison's squandered trust fund was out, but they were still on the hook for thousands of dollars in non-refundable deposits they'd made for the wedding, assuming my college fund was their personal bank. While they were scrambling, I was focusing on my future. And then it happened. I got an email from Northwood University. I'd been accepted into their pre-med program. It was my top choice, my dream school. I was ecstatic. My grandparents were overjoyed and asked if they could share the good news on social media. I said of course, thinking it was a harmless way to celebrate. I should have known better. That post was the spark that ignited the inferno. Madison saw it and had a complete public meltdown. It was a long, rambling post filled with self-pity, accusing me of always being the favorite, of having everything handed to me on a silver platter while her life was falling apart. It was a masterclass in narcissistic victimhood. But in her rage she got sloppy. Tucked in between all the poor me rhetoric were some very revealing details. She whined about how she and her fiancé Ryan had already put down huge deposits on their dream venue and a top-tier caterer, deposits they now couldn't afford. She wrote that they'd done it because they had been assured the money was as good as theirs. This little tidbit did not go unnoticed. Ryan's family, who had been kept mostly in the dark about the financial drama, saw the post. The comments section was a mess, but it was Madison's own words that raised the biggest red flags for them. They had assumed Madison's family was financially stable. Her public meltdown, which basically amounted to an admission of extreme financial recklessness, was alarming. They started to wonder what else they didn't know about their future daughter-in-law and her family. Madison thought her post was a way to garner sympathy and paint me as the villain. Instead, she had just handed her fiancé's family a detailed map of her own irresponsibility. She was so consumed by her envy of my success that she inadvertently exposed the entire precarious house of cards they had built. The social media meltdown was a disaster, but it wasn't mine. It was the beginning of the end for hers. Ryan's family was spooked, and rightfully so. Madison's social media performance had been a giant, waving red flag, and they decided it was time to do some digging. What started as a few cautious questions quickly snowballed into a full-blown investigation. They were alarmed to find out the full story of my parents' attempt to hijack my college fund. It didn't take them long to uncover Madison's other deceptions. The successful small business she'd bragged about was a failed multi-level marketing scheme she'd abandoned after 2 months. The some college she claimed to have was a complete fabrication. She didn't even have her high school diploma. The situation imploded when Ryan, prompted by his parents' concerns, decided to check his own credit report. What he found was horrifying. Madison had secretly opened multiple high-limit credit cards in his name. She had maxed every single one of them out, paying for more wedding deposits and designer dresses, all under the assumption that she'd be able to pay it all off once she got her hands on my money. It was blatant, undeniable fraud. The fallout was swift and catastrophic. The engagement was terminated on the spot. The $250,000 wedding was officially canceled. Ryan's family, absolutely furious, threatened to press charges and take Madison to court for fraud. The power in our family dynamic flipped in an instant. My parents, who had spent months trying to strong-arm me, were now facing the very real possibility of their golden child having a criminal record. To avoid a lawsuit that Madison would undoubtedly lose, Michael and Jennifer were forced into a humiliating corner. They had to liquidate their own retirement savings, the nest egg they'd been building for decades, to pay back every single cent of the fraudulent debt Madison had racked up in Ryan's name. It was a direct, devastating consequence of a lifetime of enabling. They had shielded her from every mistake, bailed her out of every jam, and now, to save her from the worst consequence of all, they had to sacrifice their own future. The inheritance of their bad decisions had finally come due, and the cost was their financial security. While my parents were away on a desperate last-ditch stress relief trip after liquidating their savings, Madison decided on one final act of defiance. Spiraling from the canceled wedding and the public humiliation, she threw a massive, destructive party at their house. It wasn't just a party. It was an act of scorched earth rebellion. She used my mother's credit card, which she wasn't supposed to have, to rack up a $5,000 bill on premium liquor, a DJ, and apparently an ice sculpture. The real damage, however, was to the house itself. My grandparents later described the scene to me, and it sounded like something out of a movie. The total for repairs came to an estimated $20,000. This was the final straw. My parents returned, already stressed and financially ruined, to find their home destroyed. The combination of the wrecked house, the new credit card debt, and the complete, utter lack of remorse from Madison finally broke them. The enabling finally reached its limit. They hit rock bottom and did the one thing they should have done years ago. They kicked Madison out. They told her she was on her own and that she was responsible for paying them back for every penny of the damage. The story resolves with me here at Northwood University, thriving. My first semester was everything I'd hoped it would be. The pre-med program is challenging, the campus is beautiful, and I've found a group of friends who are as driven and supportive as I am. My grandparents have been my rock, visiting for family weekend and cheering on my every success. I look back on the chaos of the past year not with anger but with a sense of peace. That single painful decision to say no and set a hard boundary wasn't just about protecting my college fund. It was about protecting my future. It triggered a catastrophic chain of events that shattered my family's toxic illusion, but it also set me free. I built my own future not on a handout, but on the foundation of my own hard work and the courage to defend it. And that is a victory that no amount of money can buy.